So the son of the very first Indonesian minister in the Dutch cabinet was shot in Leiden by the German Nazis. I thought it was important to start with that bomb attack.
Why?
I've been checking bookshops all over the world. Very few books on Indonesia.
That means there's two brothers. Dulles brother is quite significant for the word
Very
history.
important.
There's
Very,
two
very
brothers.
important.
Wow. Wow.
And the Dulles brother hated the Bandung Conference.
What is the most challenging, the most difficult part from your experience, what you did to write this book, or writing this book? So except this Sumarsono and Herawati, who is another prominent people in history that mentioned already, but people never heard their story.
Very interesting. The oldest man, the oldest witness, was also an Indonesian man, Jayeng Pratomo. He was a Radan Mas. His father had been one of the very first doctors from the Stovia.
Oh.
You know, the Stovia was the school for Indonesian doctors.
Yeah.
And so they came from actually they came from the Pakualam.
Okay.
They came from the royal family from Pakualam. He was related to Diponegoro. He was a far descendant from Diponegoro. And his father, after graduating at the Stovia, the medical school, he started the hospital in Bangangsi Api-Api in Sumatra. So he moved from Java first from Central Java to Batavia, Jakarta, and then from Jakarta to Bangangsi Api-Api, and he started the hospital there. So Jayeng Pratomo was Javanese but raised in Sumatra, and he was really interesting, Tito. He was in the 1930s. He was born in 1914, and he died in 2018. And the funeral was on his anniversary. The funeral, he would have been 104 years old. He lived in a small place called Callantsoog. I went to the funeral there. He came to the Netherlands in the 1930s to study.
Okay.
He was in Leiden and Rotterdam. He started medicine and then went to Rotterdam to do the same study as Mohammed Hatta. And then when the war started, and this is really interesting, when the war started in 1940 in the Netherlands, Germany invaded the Netherlands, there were about 800 Indonesian people, 800 Indonesians. Some of them were students, some of them were seamen, they worked on the ships, and some of them were girls working in colonial families. I think about 80 very soon became part of the resistance.
Against Nazi.
Against the Nazi.
Okay.
And in my book, I even said it on Saturday. I had to give a conference, and I said, like, the Dutch have forgotten how important the Indonesians were. Some of the earliest. So you have 800 Indonesians, and about 80 become Indonesian. So 800 Indonesians in the resistance.
Okay.
Anti-Nazi. When I interviewed him, he was the last survivor of the Indonesian resistance fighter, and he said, "We were against colonialism." He was part of PI. Yeah. We were against colonialism, but we were even more against fascism.
Okay.
So when German fascism arrived, they said, like, we will first fight with the Dutch against the German fascism. We will wait with the anti-colonial struggle. When the war is over, we will go back and fight for Indonesian independence. It's unbelievable. And so some of his friends were killed fighting with the Dutch against fascism. It's unbelievable. For instance, Sujono, you know Sujono? Yeah. His father was the first minister. He was the minister in the first Indonesian minister cabinet, in the Dutch government. together with Queen Wilhelmina in London.
Okay.
He died during the war. He died quite young.
Mhm.
And then his son, Sujarno's son, was a student in Leiden, also in the resistance.
Okay.
And one of the things they did with the resistance was printing, printing press. And one day, propaganda. And one day he was with a bicycle and he had a typewriter or a printing press. And wrapped in paper or wrapped in fabric, so people could not see it. It was a typewriter, or was it a press or a typewriter? It might be a press. And he was walking, and there was a military control. And he tried to cycle away. He tried to get away, and they shot him. So Sujarno, the son of the very first Indonesian minister in the Dutch cabinet, was shot in Leiden by the German Nazis. So, and this was a friend of Jayeng Pratomo. So this is really totally forgotten. Forgotten.
Yeah.
I think there should be a monument in the Netherlands for the Indonesian resistance fighter, anti-Nazi resistance fighters.
Okay. What is the most challenging, the most difficult part from your experience, what you did to write this book, or writing this book?
I think bringing it all together. It looks like a big book, but it's the shortest book I could write on this topic. It's the shortest book I could write on this topic because it has so many sides. That was difficult. That was the most difficult part.
So 600 pages, you said it's already a shortest version.
It's very short. It's the shortest you can do.
This means you're gonna be the second part, like sequel, like in the movie.
If you look, Harry Poeze did a book on Tan Malaka. He did a book on Tan Malaka just on 45, 48, I think, and it's 3 volumes.
Yeah, 3 volumes.
Unbelievable. No, this is the shortest book I could do, because I have to talk about schooling during colonial times, schooling during Japanese times, students during the Revolusi. That's one thing. It's also on economy. So it's school, economy, unions, factories, political developments, military developments, international developments.
Yes.
So what for me was very interesting was to see the connection between Sultan Shahrir and India, and he had very good contacts with India. I interviewed Upi Shahrir as well. Upi is the youngest daughter of Sultan Shahrir. She lives in Jakarta, and so I interviewed Upi as well. She was really, really interesting to talk to. So now that was all these different, and then also in the Netherlands, it was a war between the Dutch and Indonesia. But in the Netherlands, many people were against the war. So I had to make this also part of the book. And making it into a book that is readable, that is easy to read.
Storytelling.
Well, you're a journalist.
Yeah, that's the challenging part to make news to become a storytelling. Yes.
It's easy it's easy when you have an easy story, you make an easy article. That's easy.
Yeah.
If you have a complicated story, you can say, I will leave things out and I'll make it easy.
Yeah.
But keeping the complexity and telling that is a very big, I found it a very big challenge. But now Gramedia has finally signed the contract. So there will be a translation. I don't know when yet. I hope soon. The sooner the better. I hope it'll be available soon.
From what I know, what I read some English version, some parts of your book, including the opening of the book. You tell about the Sarinah bomb attack.
Of course.
It is actually one of my questions. how can you come? Why do you start your book, open your book with that incident?
Actually, I opened the book with the very first pages are about the introduction of the book. It's on what here is called inleiding. This is on the Kapel van der Werf. You know the movie. For me, it's almost like a metaphor. It's like an image. You have this KPM, the ship. It's sailing at night. It's sailing from Surabaya to Jakarta, and it's a beautiful ship. It's a new ship, and all of a sudden, it collapses. And I said it's like a metaphor for the end of colonialism. The Dutch thought that we are here. We are not going to leave. The Governor General de Jonge said, well, we have been here for 300 years. We will stay another 300 years. After that, we can talk. He was like this ship, like Kapel van der Werf, like, no problem. We are sailing. And all of a sudden, baff, end of the story.
So it is a metaphor for Dutch colonialism in Indonesia for you.
Yeah, and that's why I start the book with that. And later in the book, the metaphor of the ship comes back, because I could check all the newspapers from then, and I tried to find information on who was on the ship and who was killed. And I was especially looking at the decks. Deck 1. Yeah. It's Dutch people or Belanda, Indo-Belanda. Second deck, it's Chinese people. Okay. And perhaps people from aristocracy, from Japanese aristocracy, very few places. And then at the bottom, deck number 3 is the deck with all the, the everyday Indonesian people. And so I was using this metaphor to explain that this is how colonial society works. This is the only place where you see the hierarchy of colonial society. And there were some people could change from a deck to another deck. You could go from deck 2 to deck 3 if you had you were drinking too much or your company went bankrupt. And some people could go from deck 3 to deck 2. Like for example, Pratomo, he became a doctor, so he moved up. He became like a, but the ladders between the decks were very narrow. So a lot of people were frustrated about it. And so I used the metaphor of the Van der Werf, of the ship, because it was like on all the ships, all the KPM, KPM, the Koninklijke Paketvaartmaatschappij.
Yeah, maatschappij of sailing.
All the sailing maatschappij. And on all the boats you had this 3 decks. And so I use it as a metaphor to explain colonial society and the inequalities of colonial society.
But what I mentioned is,
and then after 2 pages, the book starts with the attack on the Jalal Wahid Hashim on the Sarinah.
What I mentioned is the first chapter. Oh yeah, page 11 to 18. Yeah, the Sarinah. Yeah.
I thought it was important to start with that bomb attack.
Why?
Because it showed something. It's like Indonesia. It's the first country that proclaimed independence after the Second World War. It's one of it's the number 4 country in the world. It's one of the biggest countries in the world in terms of population. And I think my impression is that the world
should know
is not paying enough attention to Indonesia. We hear about China, we hear about India, we hear about America. These are number 1, 2, and 3 in terms of population. But Indonesia, I've been checking bookshops all over the world. Very few books on Indonesia. I've been checking newspapers. And you could. I started with the Sarinah attack because it was so obvious then, so visible. Indonesia was in the news for 1 day, the day of the attack. And the moment it was clear that, there's only a few people, only a few casualties, 1 day later, Indonesia was forgotten again. Yeah. And so I started the book with this because I thought I think it's unfair and unjust that such a big country has gets so little international attention. It's such a big country. It's historically such an important country. So that's why I started this. So, and I was on this attack. I heard it. I heard the bomb, and then I was on the street. I was on Jalan Wahid Hasim. I saw the body, one of the men that had been killed. And that day, I stayed in my hotel room together with my friend, a French journalist, and all day, we were answering to European press, French press, Belgian press, Dutch press. We had seen, we were very close by. We had heard the bomb. We had seen a body. So everybody wanted to hear the story. So a full day it took. And I think until 6 o'clock in the evening, I was answering telephone calls. Dutch journalists, Swiss journalists, French journalists, all the time, non-stop. And I said, like, people are interested in Indonesia. The day after, nothing. And I said, like, how is this possible? Indonesia, it's an important country. It's a big country, and it's part of world history. It has played such an important role in world history. So I will start with this innocence, this ignorance, this big ignorance worldwide.
From your book, or let's say, from what I know about your book, you took side on colonized people and record their experience, which is, let's say, unheard in previous history version of this colonization. My question is why? Why you took this point of view? Why do you take side on this we as colonized people?
Yeah, I tried to interview people from many different sides. For me, it was important. It was important to have voices from the Netherlands, from Indonesia, from Japan, from Nepal. I thought my book would have been unbalanced if I would only have been talking to Javanese people, for instance. So it was important. I have to say, when I was writing this book, I was every week I was more and more surprised by what the Dutch did. And in the colonial times, the Dutch made a number of really big mistakes, really important mistakes. But especially after the colonial times, during the conflict, the Perang Kemerdekaan, there was so many tactical, political mistakes from the Dutch side. The Linggadjati agreement could have been, if the Dutch would have respected the Linggadjati agreement, nobody would have been killed during the war. Linggadjati could have been a peaceful solution to the problem. And perhaps only for 10 years, and then new negotiations would have taken place, and global decolonization was happening, and the Dutch were going to let go, etc., etc. In August 45, I can understand that the Dutch were surprised. Yeah. People didn't know what decolonization, they were surprised. But in 1948 and 1949, when they did the second agressie militaire, India was independent, the Philippines were independent, independence movement was everywhere. And then starting a war, it was very brutal, unstrategic, and stupid.
Like you define, like, may I define, like, this is a part of global South at the time of the movement, this global things happen after Indonesia independence, global South versus global, and then after it come to Conference Asia Africa.
Yeah. What you see is that until the Bandung Conference, you had this sort of north-south colonialism. Belgium had Congo, France had Algeria, Great Britain had many parts in Africa and Asia, and the Conference Asia Africa gave for the first time a south-south dynamic. It was the beginning of the third world, what we call now the global South. It was really, it had, at the Bandung Conference, it was the first world conference without the West. And the delegates there represented more than half of the planet. More than half. Unbelievable. So symbolically, it was very, very important. The idea of European supremacy was over, of European superpower was over by then. And so it was a very important and very interesting conference in that respect.
Yeah.
And that's why the subtitle of the book is, you've seen it, it's Revolusi in the Indonesia and the origin of the modern world.
Origin of modern world.
Yeah, and the birth of the modern world. So, and that's why the book is called the Revolusi. It was the Revolusi for Indonesia, but it was also a revolution on the global scale.
Okay.
For instance, at the end of the book, I have a map. The United Nations changed because of the Bandung Conference.
Oh yeah.
More countries became member. I'll try to show you the map. More and more countries became member of the United Nations. Yeah, there's this. I made this map. Countries who were member of the United Nations before and after Bandung.
Okay. Oh, quite great impact actually, Indonesia for the world.
Very, very, very important impact. Very, very important impact. I even suggest that the beginning of the European Union, the beginning of European cooperation, it was partly also a reaction to the Bandung Conference, because Europe still had African colonies, and they were afraid that Asia was going to take Africa away from Europe. It's true. There are fragments in the book. There are fragments in the book where people are saying, "We have to do something because with the Bandung Conference they are going to take over, and these are communist or sort of perhaps with Beijing and Moscow." It's very, very strict. So Europe was afraid to lose its backyard. Africa was the backyard of Europe, and the Asians are going to take Africa away. It's been a really important part of European politics.
Is it a part of, let's say, left-wing movement that create this Indonesia independence, and the world constellation at the time is with West and East bloc?
There was a fear. The Bandung Conference was 55. One of the participants was Nasser from Egypt.
Yeah.
He comes back from Bandung. And he starts the Suez Crisis, which is against France and England, anti-colonial conflict. That's 56. 57 is the beginning of the European Union.
Okay.
So they looked at Bandung, they looked at Suez, and they said like, oh, the brown people of the world are becoming too powerful. We should do something about it. It was really one of the arguments.
Brown people.
Yeah, it's the colonies. The colonies become too powerful, and they don't obey anymore.
Okay.
And so we're losing Asia with the Bandung Conference. We're losing the Arab world with the Suez Crisis, and now we might even lose Africa. We don't want this. So this also it's really interesting to see.
Yeah.
And then what do you see? And this is so 55 Bandung, 56 Suez, 57 Europe, the Treaty of Rome, it's called. 58 was Accra. Accra is the capital of Ghana.
Okay.
First Black African country, and Ghana was the first Black African country to become independent.
Okay.
And in 58 they organized a conference inspired by Bandung.
Oh,
and
I missed it.
African leaders come together.
Wow.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. It's real. This is my last chapter. How Bandung changed the world. It changed the Arab world. It changed the African world. It changed the European world.
Even European. Wow.
And the European. And then I'll also look at. And then you see the American reaction. CIA becomes important in Africa. They kill people. They change regimes. Sukarno is replaced by Suharto. in Congo, the Mobutu comes to the throne. Same time, same month as Suharto, November 65. November 65. The very same month, the CIA supports Mobutu and regime change in Indonesia as well. And they both stay for 32 years until the end of the Cold War.
That means there's two brothers. Dulles brother is quite significant for the world
very
history.
Important.
There's
very,
two brothers.
Very important.
Wow. Wow.
And the Dulles brother hated the Bandung Conference. They hated the Bandung Conference.
Yeah. That's why
they were very nervous. I have an article. Hang on, I had an article. It was really interesting about the Americans on the Bandung Conference. I interviewed two people who were at the Bandung Conference. One of them was the bodyguard, Sukarno's bodyguard.
Okay.
Sriono. He had been a Pemuda he was 14 when the Revolusi took place, and he had been in the Pemuda during the rebellion, and then 10 years later at Bandung he was one of the bodyguards of Sukarno. Wow, he had to taste the water. He had to taste the water to see it was not poisoned. Here, this is what he said. Yes, I was there. Hundreds and hundreds of people came to Bandung. Our country was receiving all the countries, all the heads of state, all the heads of government. Nehru from India, Unu from Burma, Nasser from Egypt. I've seen them all. We were chosen from the military police. We had to be ready day and night for our presidents. We were used to that, but now we didn't sleep at all. We had to check everything, the access to the building, checking the stairs, the place from where he was speaking. He had to stand to see whether everything was safe. We all had standard procedures. We were checking the staff. I even had to taste his food and his water to see it was not poisoned. Oh, wow. It's good, yeah. Even at that time, they already realized the danger of for their leader, yeah? No, there were two dangers. The war with the DI was still going on. The rebels, yeah. The rebels, and it was close to Bandung. Yeah. I see. Thousands and thousands of police. And the second thing was the Chinese delegation. They came to Bandung and their plane was exploded. All the Chinese diplomats were killed. For Bandung? For Bandung. Oh, I missed that part. And they thought it was the Americans. But it was the Taiwanese. Taiwan. Kuomintang. Yeah, there was an anti-communist attack. The only person who was not on the plane, he changed the plane, was Zhou Enlai, the prime minister. Zhou Enlai, he was the right hand of Mao, and he took a different plane. And he survived. Wow. And he survived. And so there was a lot of nervosity. That's why he had to check the food, and he had to stand on the place where Sukarno was going to speak to see no guns, no danger, he had to check everything. This means this plane accident like days before the Bandung conference? 2 days before. Yeah, it's not very well known. Let me check. Here. Minister Dulles about the Bandung conference. He was deeply worried about possible implications of this conference. This is what he writes. And here I quote him: "The voice of the free will should should muffle the voice of communism on the Afro-Asia conference." The voice of the free world was the voice of Europe and America. Literally, this is Dulles saying. And with the president, I had a thing about the president as well. Hang on. Because when the conference started, Khrushchev from Russia sent a telegram with congratulations to Sukarno, and the Americans did not send any telegram with congratulations. Here, Eisenhower, he said, like, literally, 1 week before the Bandung conference, President Eisenhower said, it was in a national security meeting, he said, literally, "It is very alarming to see how the communists are successful to ident themselves with the growing nationalism in the colonies. The United Nations, on the other hand, have not been successful to turn the spirit of nationalism in our advantage. The communists are much more successful than we are. Unbelievable.
Yeah. We are
So
laughing.
they were so nervous about communism. Yeah, and I wrote on the day of the opening of the conference, he didn't send any telegram with congratulations to the conference of Bandung, but his Russian colleague Khrushchev did it. Unbelievable. Here, and so I said, so there was a lot of tension in the air, a lot of tension. On the way to Bandung, the plane containing the official Chinese delegation crashed. Only 3 people survived the crash. China immediately accused the United Nations of America of sabotage, but America denied. Later research indicated that it was indeed an attack, but Taiwan was behind it. The target was the Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, but he had taken a different airplane to be safe. So the Cold War was traveling to Bandung as well. This is the last line of that passage. Yeah. And meanwhile, Indonesia itself was fighting the Darul Islam movement. On a few dozens of kilometers away from the conference center in Bandung, you had the rebels in the mountains. There were 2,000 police agents in the streets of Bandung. You could not leave a package in a hotel anymore because people were fearing attacks. And that was the reason why Sriono had to taste the food and the water of President Sukarno. That's it.
Yeah. Just because before Bandung, there are already some attempts to kill Sukarno actually.
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah.
Oh yeah, they had been a couple of
So,
had been at one of the attacks. Sriono had been one of the. He was the bodyguard when he was attacked. I think in Jakarta. Cikini. Yeah, he was there.
Yeah.
The Cikini attack. He was there.
Yeah.
With the children.
So about your book, it's a quite harsh question. What do you think your book, the different your Revolusi, and another history book of Indonesia that already written?